Hi AB Psychology students, and welcome back. Today we're going to be starting our unit on biological psychology, and the video today is going to focus on talking about the heredity and environment and the role that each of them play in understanding ourselves and those around us. So the learning objective from the College Board is to explain this relationship in shaping our behavior and mental processes. And the way we're going to do that is through two essential questions. So we're going to look at the role nature and nurture each play in our behavior and thinking. And then we're going to look at specifically twin, family, and adoption studies and how they better help us understand the impact of genes versus environment. So when we are talking about heredity and environment, the question that we always hear is this nature versus nurture. So is it nature that causes us to act the way that we want to, the way that we are, and that's our genes, our genetics, our heredity, what's given to us from our parents, passed down from our parents? Or is it nurture? And this would be our environment. And in this case, the picture I have here shows that our parents are, of course, a part of our environment, but so are all the different things that we come into contact with throughout our lifetimes, which of course is a little bit tricky because our nature is our biological parents, and our nurture, if we grow up with them, can also be our biological parents. So the joke is always like nature or nurture, either way it's your parents' fault, but just remembering that nature is our genetics and nurture is our environment. Now, with this question, we have an answer. It's not nature or nature versus nurture. It's nurture works on what nature provides. And so it is nature and nurture, right? Both of them are always coming into play. How much is nurture and how much is nature depends on the particular aspect or characteristic that you're looking at. So before we go any further into discussing what we know about nature and nurture, I wanted to just review a little bit of the nature, the basic genetics. So when we talk about genetics, we want to make sure that we are clear on the fact that all humans have cells, and those cells have a nucleus, and each nucleus contains chromosomes, right? There's 46 chromosomes, 23 from each parent, and each chromosome is made up of 2 strands of DNA. And those DNA are then broken down into segments called genes. So genes are smaller chunks of the larger DNA, and the larger DNA makes up the chromosomes. Now, in AP Psychology, what we really focus on is the idea of how genes can be turned on or off based on environment or other genetic influences. So what is the expression of those genes? And what we're learning as we continue to study the human genome and genetics, and we have more technology and ability to look at things in more depth, is that most human traits are what we call polygenetic. So this means that instead of thinking about, if you're tall, it's this one gene, it's that any particular characteristic is made up of lots of different genes. For example, something like depression has 269 genes that can be associated with it. So, when we are studying nature versus nurture, there's 2 schools of psychology that really focus on this study. And the first school of psychology that focuses on this is evolutionary psych. So humans are incredibly similar when it comes to their genetics. Like 99.9% of our DNA, from me to you to the next person, are exactly the same, right? And so evolutionary psychology focuses on how we are alike given natural selection. So how we came to be so similar to one another and how those similarities are passed down from generation to generation. So when we think about natural selection, the idea is that we have these inherited traits that lead to our survival, right? So for example, if we take a look at this graphic here, we've got Joe and Jim. So Joe mates and has children, and those children mate and have children. And so Joe's characteristics are passed down from generation to generation. While Jim, if he doesn't mate, does not pass on his genes. Now, why didn't Jim mate? Well, maybe he was sick and it didn't allow him to, have any, children. He wasn't allowed, like he didn't reproduce in any way. Or maybe he died at an earlier age. Or maybe he, had a certain trait about him where people didn't want to mate with him. We don't know. But ultimately, all of those things that stopped him from mating eventually were not passed on to generations, and so they were not part of our natural selection. Over time, these, inherited traits have given us what we call a biological predisposition. So they are ways that we think or act that are based on what helped our ancestors survive. And these can be really helpful, but they can also be really harmful. So an example of how they're harmful is like in the past, humans developed this predisposition to love sugar and fat because they helped us survive and they weren't always available. So our ancestors, when they had access to sugar and fat, ate it because they knew it would help them have energy, and when there was a shortage of food, they could rely on that storage of fat in their body. However, today, sugar and fat is in everything. So we no longer need to crave it and like have a predisposition to love it because it's always available. It's not like a rarity. However, we still have this predisposition to love it, so that's why we are so addicted to salty, sugary, fatty snacks. And of course that can lead to obesity, which today is a problem for us. Okay, so humans are similar in many ways. Like I talked about with evolutionary psychology, we focus on those similarities. However, even though we are so similar, right, 99.9% similar, it's that 0.1% that really matters in making each of us unique. And so what behavioral genetics focuses on is basically a combination of the behavioral school of psychology and the biological school. Not exactly, but it's the idea of we want to focus on the genetic roots of our differences. So what is it about our genes and our individual choices and our environment? What is it about how all three of those things come together that make that 0.1% difference, and how do those differences make us who we are, like make us special and unique? Our genetic makeup interacts with a unique environment and unique choices, and that creates a one-of-a-kind person. And so behavior genetics studies those differences. Now, when we want to study these differences in people, one of the best ways to do it is using twin and adoption studies. So first we're going to focus on the twin part of it, and then I'll focus on the adoption part of it. So when we talk about twins, there's two different types of twins that we're going to focus on. So identical twins, which are sometimes called monozygotic, and fraternal twins, which are also called dizygotic. What is the difference between the two? So identical twins are like human clones of each other. It is one egg and one sperm that splits into two, right? They share all of their genes. However, one small note is that some genes, identical twins have the exact same genes, but sometimes they don't have the same copies of the gene, or the wiring of the brain is slightly different. And so there are still very, very, very small differences based on the way that the prenatal and placental environment happens, but for the most part we think of them as clones. Fraternal twins are no more similar than ordinary siblings, right? So genetically they are like the fraternal twins, just because they're born at the same time, are not any more similar than any other ordinary siblings. So when we study identical and fraternal twins, what we find is that identical twins share more similarities than fraternal twins. It highlights a genetic cause. What's an example of this? So if we look at identical twins versus fraternal twins, we see that with autism, if one identical twin has it, the other twin has a 3 out of 4 chance. Versus if it's a fraternal twin, they have a 1 out of 4 chance. So significantly higher chance if they are identical, which points to a strong genetic connection, right? However, what's interesting here is that it's not 4 out of 4, right? So you would assume that if autism was completely genetic and there wasn't any environment, that it would be 4 out of 4, but it's 3 out of 4. So that speaks to some environment, right? So you can see how studying identical versus fraternal twins gives us more information about how much genetics, how much environment, 100% one, 100% other, and what are the variations in between. So just kind of looking at what we've found in some identical versus twin studies, if you look at the chart over on your left side, these are all kind of different traits: height, reading disabilities, autism, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia. And as you'll see, overall, identical twins are always more similar than fraternal twins. Identical twins are the white bar, fraternal twins are the gray bar. However, no single trait on this entire chart is 100% genetic. So that means that even for something like height, there is still something in the environment, nutrition, exposure to different toxins, that can impact your height, right? But the ones that are at the top are more genetically based, and the ones that are at the bottom are more environmentally based. If you look over on this chart, these are all different personality traits. So something like extroversion has how outgoing you are, agreeableness is like how friendly you are, neuroticism is how anxious you are. And so you'll see that, again, monozygotic or identical twins are much more similar than dizygotic or fraternal twins, pointing to a genetic connection even on personality traits, right? Okay, However, there's another way we can study twins, and this is when we have twins that are separated at birth, either identical or fraternal, but identical twins separated at birth provide a unique circumstance that we can then use to study. Obviously, it's very unethical to do this to twins, like knowing that they are identical and separating them. However, it has happened in the past, and there are several different books and movies written about identical twins that were separated at birth. In this case, there's a movie called Three Identical Strangers, and they were separated at birth and into adoption. Right? They were taken from their birth mom and they were adopted and given to 3 separate families, and each family didn't know that any of the other triplet existed. This provides unique opportunity, like I said, because they have the exact same DNA, but then different environments. So if they are then different, that shows environmental impact. What we find when studying twins this way is that there are lots of similarities between separated twins, but much more similarities for identical twins than fraternal twins. So let's take a little bit more of a specific look on how we would use for identical twins. So identical twins, they have the same DNA and the same environment normally. And let's say that they grow up and we find that their IQ scores are the same. Well, it's hard to know then if that IQ is genetics or environment because they have the same DNA and the same environment. If we are studying identical twins who were separated at birth, what we now have is same DNA and different environment. Twin A grows up in California, twin B grows up in Texas. They have different locations, different families, different socioeconomic statuses. All kinds of things about them are different. So now if their intelligence all these years later is still the same, right? So they have the same intelligence. We now know that genetics plays a huge role in that similarity because they have such different environments. Okay, we can also understand nature and nurture by looking at adoption studies. So when we look at adoption studies, basically what we have is that there's 2 groups, genetic relatives and environmental relatives. And we wonder, are people more like their biological or their environmental parents, right? And what we find is that when it comes to research, our personalities are more similar to our biological parents than an adopted parent. However, that doesn't mean that your adopted parents don't matter and that the culture you grew up in doesn't matter. There are some other things that we find are very much based on your adopted parents. And those could be things like the values you choose, the religion you are, the life choices that you end up making are impacted by the environment you grow up in. However, if you are naturally tend to be more outgoing or more reserved, maybe if you tend to be more friendly or more aggressive, those are things that they find come more from your biological parents. Okay, so last bit here is that there's a new study that we're kind of focusing on now when talking about nature versus nurture, and this is the idea of epigenetics. So it's how much your nurture can actually impact your nature. So epigenetics is the idea of above genetics. So this is the study of how your environment not only can change the way that you are, but it actually can change the genetic expression of your DNA. So for example, if you smoke, it can actually change the way your DNA either is tight or loose, and that can change the way that then you behave, or different diseases you may get, or different things that may happen to you, right? So lots of environmental influences through your life can turn on genes by adding like tags. I want you to think of these tags as like light switches. So a tag is added onto your genetic coding, and then it either turns on or off the gene. And in general, anything can, there's lots of research going on about what can add or not add these tags. We think about like stress can add tags, smoking can add tags, nutrition can add tags, exercise can add tags. However, in general, these tags are removed when an embryo is formed. So like your tags impact you, but your tags don't impact the next generation. However, we're finding that about 1% of these tags stay and can get passed on from child to parent. Another, just kind of like a visual of this, is that if we take twins, right? So 3-year-old twins, so there's a red twin and a green twin. And when we lay their DNA on top of each other, what we're seeing is that they have most of their genetic tags in the same place because they are showing up as yellow. However, when by the age that they're 50, all this environment has changed in their lives. Who they talk to, what they eat, what they do, what they're interested in, all the things, what life choices they make, the stress they go under. And when you lay their DNA on top of each other at 50, you no longer see much yellow. Because what's happened is that their epigenetics has actually changed, and now they have tags in different places, right? So this is how we get twins that end up being different from each other as life goes on. All right, so stop here and make sure you can answer those essential questions we started with. And that's all for now, AP Psychos. And remember, psychology is flippin' awesome.